It was a dark Friday in Jerusalem. Ominous clouds were gathering over Golgotha, anticipating the very moment that would split history in two. Down at the foot of 3 crosses, a Roman centurion was simply carrying out an order, another execution. This time, it was Jesus of Nazareth. His duty was clear: ensure the prisoner died. And so he did. When the 6th hour came, a chilling darkness fell over the entire land, lasting until the 9th hour. And at that 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Then, giving one last great cry, he expired. In that instant, the veil of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom, and the centurion, who was standing right there in front of him, watching it all unfold, suddenly said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." On that day, this Roman soldier's entire destiny was rewritten. The man responsible for supervising the death of Jesus was shaken to the very core of his being. He transitioned from executioner to witness. He went from being the one who, according to tradition, pierced the body of Jesus with a lance, to becoming the very first Gentile to believe that he is the Son of God. He would go on to renounce his high-ranking post in the most powerful empire on earth and join the followers of Jesus. He carried his word to faraway lands, proclaiming the gospel with the raw passion of someone who had seen it all and been utterly transformed. But his own terrible end would be marked in the history of the church under his name, Longinus. Before that dark Friday, Longinus was a Roman centurion. These weren't just soldiers. They were the leaders of the legions, with more than 100 men under their command. They were officers respected for their discipline, their courage, and their sheer effectiveness on the battlefield. His life was marked by harshness, by violence, and by duty. To ascend to the rank of centurion, it wasn't enough to just be strong. You had to be intelligent, strategic, and above all, implacable. And Longinus was all of those things. His life was discipline, order, and blind obedience to Rome. He had witnessed death without flinching. He had carried out brutal orders without hesitating. He was a perfect instrument of the empire. Until that day. If you're already hooked by this story of transformation, do me a favor and hit that like button so I know. The city wasn't even fully awake yet, but you could already hear the sound of hurried steps, of hushed angry voices, and a name that was racing through the shadows: Jesus of Nazareth. He had been arrested the night before in the Garden of Gethsemane, betrayed with a kiss by one of his own, Judas Iscariot, for a price of 30 pieces of silver. He was dragged before the Sanhedrin, the council of the high priests, who accused him of blasphemy for having declared himself the Son of God. There, they beat him, they spat on him, and they condemned him. But they didn't have the power to execute him. For that, they needed Rome's authorization. And so, at dawn, they brought him before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea. Pilate, sitting on his judgment seat, looked at Jesus with curiosity and asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus responded calmly, "You say so." The chief priests and elders kept accusing him, but Jesus remained in perfect silence. Pilate, baffled, leaned toward him and said, "Do you not hear all the things they are saying against you? Are you not going to defend yourself?" Jesus didn't answer a single word. He offered no justification, no defense. Pilate was astonished. He had seen criminals beg, lie, and cry to save their lives. But this man possessed an overwhelming, unsettling calm. Just then, a messenger rushed up to the tribunal. It was an urgent message from Pilate's own wife, and it said, "Have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered much today in a dream because of him." Pilate shifted uneasily in his seat. He could feel that something much bigger than himself was happening, something he couldn't control. Now, it was customary to release one prisoner during the Passover feast, and Pilate thought he'd found an escape route. He offered the people a choice: Jesus, the one called the Christ, or Barabbas, a notorious criminal, a known murderer. But the priests and religious leaders incited the crowd to scream with hatred, "Barabbas!" Pilate raised his hands and said, "Then what shall I do with Jesus?" The crowd roared back, "Crucify him!" Pilate, clearly disturbed, asked one more time, "Why? What evil has he done?" But their answer was even more brutal than before. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And Pilate, seeing that he was getting nowhere against that tide of rage, took a basin of water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of the blood of this just man," he declared. "See to it yourselves." Then Pilate released Barabbas, and he handed Jesus over to be crucified. The destiny of the Son of God was sealed. The soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium. The centurion Longinus, as always, was standing firm near the entrance. He had supervised dozens of punishments. He had seen many men die. But this day was different. The prisoner before them offered no resistance. He didn't scream, he didn't curse, he didn't beg. He simply endured every blow as if he knew it was necessary. The soldiers, cruel in their entertainment, had stripped him of his clothes, tied him forcefully to the column, and begun to scourge him with brutality. The whip descended again and again, tearing flesh without mercy, and still he did not scream. Longinus observed, arms crossed, his face carved by years of violence, but something in his eyes was beginning to change. The other soldiers mocked him. They threw a purple robe over his shoulders, wove a crown of thorns, and jammed it down onto his head. Blood covered his face, but his eyes remained open, fixed, serene. They put a reed in his hand as if it were a scepter. They knelt before him and laughed. "Hail, King of the Jews!" Longinus took no part in the mockery. He just watched, and for the first time in years, he felt uncomfortable, not because of the violence, but because of the sheer dignity of the man being beaten. What do you think was going through Longinus's mind at this exact moment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. They spat on him. They struck him on the head over and over with the reed. And when they finally got tired of their game, they ripped the robe off him, put his own clothes back on, and prepared him for the crucifixion. But Longinus couldn't look away. Something inside him, long dormant, was beginning to awaken. He couldn't understand why this man didn't defend himself. He couldn't understand why, in the middle of all that humiliation, there was no hatred in his face, only a deep, profound compassion. While others laughed, he began to question, who is this man really? He didn't know it yet, but he would find out very soon, because on this day, Longinus would be a witness to the greatest act of love the world has ever known, and his life would never be the same again. The soldiers took Jesus, pushed him out of the praetorium, and placed a rough, heavy cross on his shoulders, already stained by the history of other condemned men. The road to Golgotha had begun. Centurion Longinus was at the front, clearing a path through the crowd. It was his duty to escort the prisoner to the place of crucifixion, Golgotha, the Hill of Skulls, where those Rome wanted to forget went to die. Jesus advanced through shoves and screams. Some spat on him, others insulted him, but there were also those who wept in silence. In the midst of the crowd, his mother Mary was desperately searching for him with her eyes. She couldn't see him. She asked the disciple John, "John, help me, get me closer to my son." They both pushed their way through the crowd. But then a soldier shoved Jesus with force. His body, exhausted, collapsed onto the stones. It was his first fall. Jesus fell and the cross fell on top of him. The soldiers whipped him again. "Get up!" they shouted. And with great effort, Jesus got back to his feet. Mary and John managed to get closer just as Jesus fell a second time. Mary couldn't hold back and ran toward him. She knelt at his side, her hands trembling, her eyes full of anguish, and with a broken voice she said, "I am here." Jesus lifted his bloodied face and replied, "You see, Mother, how I make all things new." It wasn't a phrase of comfort. It was a living prophecy of what was about to happen. The weight of the cross was crushing his wounded back. His body was beginning to give out, and Jesus fell again. The soldiers whipped him to get him to stand up, but he couldn't. His knees would no longer respond. Longinus observed him. He'd seen this before, defeated broken men. But Jesus wasn't defeated. There was something in him that would not break. Then the centurion Longinus grabbed a man from the countryside who was just passing by and ordered him, "You, take the cross." Jesus slowly got to his feet. His eyes looked for the man's, and although exhausted, he gave him a look of gratitude. The procession continued as Simon helped Jesus carry the cross. The streets were witnesses to a procession of death. Women were weeping. Jesus, bleeding and exhausted, turned toward them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children." Longinus heard those words, and his insides shook once more. Who was this man who, on the brink of collapse, thought of others? Finally, they arrived at Golgotha, a dry, arid hill destined for horror. The 3 wooden beams were already prepared, and the soldiers began their work. Jesus didn't fight back. He didn't curse. He didn't resist. He extended his arms as if offering his body, as if he were giving himself up of his own free will. Then the moment came. One of the soldiers held his arm. Another raised the hammer. A scream was stifled in the sky. Mary shuddered. John looked away. The people murmured with each blow of the hammer. Some cried, others were still mocking, and Longinus remained standing, motionless. When all 3 were crucified, Jesus in the middle, and on each side 2 criminals, they raised the crosses with great effort. The heavy beam fell into its hole with a dull thud, and Jesus' body shook violently from the impact. The criminals on either side of Jesus screamed. One of them looked at Jesus with contempt and shouted, "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us too." But the other, with a weak but truthful voice, rebuked his companion and said, "Do you not even fear God? You who are under the same condemnation. We deserve this. We are paying for what we did. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he turned his face toward Jesus and whispered, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And then Jesus pronounced a promise that would resonate for all time. "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Longinus, observing from his post, could not believe what he was hearing. He had witnessed many executions, but he had never seen anyone like Jesus. The time passed, but the world seemed to have stopped. The sun stopped shining, and a blanket of darkness spread over the entire region. This is a story that truly changes perspectives. If you want more in-depth stories just like this one, make sure you're subscribed to True Light and have that notification bell turned on. Longinus, at his post, watched him. Jesus, hanging on the wood, still had words, but not of pain, of forgiveness. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Longinus felt a tremor in his chest. Forgiveness? For those who whipped him, for those who nailed him, For those who mocked him, forgiveness. For him, the first claps of thunder began to roar in the distance. A storm was approaching. Caiaphas, satisfied, left along with the other religious leaders. But Mary remained, broken with grief, while John held her tenderly. With a weak but clear voice, Jesus spoke, "Woman, here is your son." And then, looking at John, he said, "Here is your mother." Jesus' body was beginning to fail. And then, with a cry that tore the silence, he called out to heaven, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Some thought he was calling for Elijah. They thought he was asking for a heavenly rescue. Then one of them ran and soaked a sponge in vinegar, put it on a reed, and lifted it to his lips. But Jesus did not drink. He would take no relief. His surrender had to be total. The silence became absolute. Jesus raised his gaze. He knew that everything was coming to its end. And then, with the last strength he had, he proclaimed, "It is finished." The heavens held their breath. And for the last time, Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And with those words, he bowed his head, and he died. Suddenly, the earth responded. In that instant, the ground trembled under everyone's feet. A great earthquake shook Jerusalem. The rocks split. The tombs were opened, and the veil of the temple was ripped in two, from top to bottom. The people fell silent. The faces that were once mocking filled with fear. Many began to beat their chests, realizing what they had done. And then the centurion Longinus fell to his knees. The words escaped his lips without him being able to contain them. And with a broken voice, he declared before everyone, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." The centurion responsible for his crucifixion became the first Gentile to publicly recognize the crucified Christ. And then silence fell like a shroud over Golgotha. The body of Jesus hung lifeless. The soldiers, unnerved by the growing commotion, began to retreat. The people, confused and fearful, dispersed. It was the day of preparation for the Passover, and the Jews did not permit bodies to remain on the crosses during the Sabbath. Because of this, they went to ask Pilate to order the legs of the condemned men to be broken, to accelerate their death. The order was given to centurion Longinus, and he gave the command. The soldiers, without hesitation, took a large iron bar, approached the thieves crucified next to Jesus, and broke their legs. Longinus knew that Jesus was already dead, but it was his duty to confirm his death. It was Roman law. So, Longinus took his spear, approached the cross, and with a firm movement, plunged the spear into Jesus' side. And in that instant, blood and water flowed out. The evangelist John, who was there present, would write it with solemnity. And he who saw it gives testimony, and his testimony is true. Longinus looked at the wound and at his spear, stained with that pure blood. Without knowing it, he had just been a witness to the fulfillment of the prophecy. They will look on the one whom they pierced. It was a symbol. Blood to redeem, water to purify. Tradition says that the blood fell on his face, and, as the story goes, he had an ailment in his eyes that clouded his vision. But upon receiving that sacred mixture upon his eyes, he regained his sight. There, at the foot of the cross, under a sky that was still weeping, Longinus understood. He understood that he had not executed a rebel. He had plunged a spear into the body of the Son of God. He fell to his knees once more. Now, as a believer, the sacred texts don't record every step of what followed, but the tradition of the Church and various ancient documents narrate what came next. Longinus, shaken, disturbed by what he had seen, could not go back to the barracks as if nothing had happened. For days he didn't sleep. The image of Christ hanging on the cross in silence haunted him like a flame that would not go out. He could no longer obey orders without asking himself if he was serving the truth or just a blind empire. After the crucifixion, rumors began to spread in Jerusalem. They said that Jesus' tomb was empty. Some spoke of apparitions, of encounters with the man he himself had seen die on the cross. The centurion listened in silence, but every word that reached his ears ignited something inside him. In the deepest part of his soul, he knew that it wasn't a lie. Something in him told him that death had not been the end. For days, he found no peace. The images of Golgotha pursued him like a sacred fire. He remembered every word of Jesus, every look, every silence. And while the world returned to its routine, he could not return to his. He could not continue being the implacable centurion he had been for years. His heart, hardened by iron and blood, was beginning to crack open. When he heard that some claimed to have seen him alive, he wasn't surprised. He didn't feel skepticism or confusion, only a quiet, powerful confirmation. Yes, it was true. Jesus had conquered death. For the first time, Longinus was beginning to understand what faith meant. For the first time, he understood the real weight of the cross, the value of forgiveness, and the immense power of redemption. This is a story of transformation that more people really need to hear. If you agree, please consider sharing this video with someone you know. Finally, he understood. He renounced his post. He took off his armor, returned his sword, and without looking back, he abandoned the Roman army and began his path of faith. He joined the disciples, sought out those who had known Jesus, and began to learn from the one whom he had once executed. His name, Longinus, began to circulate among the first believers. The centurion who had commanded men in the name of the empire now walked barefoot, with his heart on fire, preaching about a king he had once helped to crucify. For years, he traveled through the regions of Cappadocia and Caesarea in modern-day Turkey, preaching the name of the one he had once crucified. "I saw him die," he would say, "but in his death, I discovered life." His testimony was powerful. He wasn't speaking about theories or rumors. He had been there, and his story moved hearts. The one who previously wielded the sword now lifted up the word of the gospel with courage. But Rome does not forgive those who turn away from its authority, and for that very reason he was persecuted. Longinus was arrested. He was interrogated, beaten, and threatened with death. They offered him freedom in exchange for denying Christ. But Longinus, with the peace of one who has found the truth, responded with his faith, and so he was condemned. The same empire that had trained him as a soldier would now execute him as a traitor. They took him to the outskirts of the city, and there, on a deserted hill, he was beheaded. Longinus died as a martyr, but not with fear. He died with his eyes lifted up, like the one he had seen raise his gaze on the cross and say, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." His body was buried in the region of Cappadocia, and soon the Christians of the area began to venerate him as a saint. Many claimed that his tomb was a place of miracles and healing, and his name began to be remembered not as the executioner, but as the witness, as the believer, and as the martyr. And so, with the passing of the centuries, the church recognized him as Saint Longinus, the one who saw, the one who believed, and the one who died for the one who first died for him. But he wasn't the only one. You have to know the story of Peter, John, James, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, Simon, Thaddeus, and James. From the streets of Jerusalem to the ends of the earth, these 12 men would carry a message that would challenge kings, tear down temples, and split history in two. They had no armies, no swords, no political alliances, only the faith of what they had seen, and their word. You have to see the video that's appearing on your screen right now, the film about the apostles. This isn't just the history of the church, it's the story of how 12 men defied the most powerful empire in history and conquered the world with only their faith and what they sacrificed to achieve it.